handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman, Seat, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder, Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2 1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4 7 tree 9er, 8 9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds HEPT, gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And welcome to the Denise Simon Experience, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to have you with us. We're going to take this first segment here, and we're going to go all the way over to South Africa. It is a region of the globe that gets very little attention, and quite frankly, I think it had some national attention for probably 10 minutes or so, and then it just faded away. So I'm very pleased to have Mark Williamson with us, and Mark is in fact got an awful lot of years in the United States Air Force as a intelligence application officer. He has been to fighters weapons schools, and he's got a teaching degree. He has lived abroad. He speaks several languages, and I'm very pleased that he has been keeping current with what is going on in South Africa. So with that, Mark, welcome to the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We have a very sad situation that's going on in South Africa. In fact, there's a lot of media outside the United States that has been sounding the alarm on what is happening in South Africa, and that is with regard to the farmers. And there's been a lot of dispute on whether that's a real condition or not a real condition. It's clearly a real condition where white farmers are in fact being attacked and in some cases killed, because I think there's been at least 85 deaths that I've counted, and kind of keeping some tallies, and over I think 400 or so that have been injured in some of these attacks, where the government really has these militia types that are going out and seizing these farms. So these farmers have a phone network where they call in for backup if their particular farm is being attacked in some form or fashion. Are you seeing that same thing, Mark?
Well, sort of, yes. First of all, to put all of this into context, South Africa is the 25th largest country in the world by area, 24th by population, 34th largest economy. And then when you focus in on Africa, it's the second largest economy and also the most developed economy in Africa. So what goes on there is very significant on a global scale. And it's interesting to note also that about a quarter of the total population are actually unemployed, living on $1.25 a day. So you have a population there that is vulnerable to being exploited and perhaps manipulated in some cases. Okay, so there's a lot of issues there that they're steering towards the issue with people owning on the farms. And those farms are populated predominantly by people of European descent. Now, when I say predominantly, that's the ones that are being attacked. Are people of European descent. Of course, there are some people of African descent that actually work on farms with them who are also targeted as well. But usually these attacks are staged based on intelligence data that they're getting. They're keeping these under surveillance. They're attacking when the people are home. And I've seen statistics that as high as 47% of the time, the attackers are not at all interested in robbery or valuables, which kind of goes against the government's claim that when these attacks occur that it's mainly a robbery or just part of the regular crime rate. Also, what we're seeing is a lot of gratuitous violence. I saw one report where a person, a child, had actually been drowned in boiling water. And then a lot of other reports where the people are being stabbed with farm implements or being stabbed repeatedly. It just, the violence is just, it's incredible, it's gratuitous, and it seems sadistic, very highly sadistic would be a good way to describe it.
And you know what's pretty interesting is you mentioned, Mark, the crime rate there. I mean, there's carjackings going on literally by the hour. And,
yes,
I mean, it's all over the board, isn't it?
Well, there's a very high murder rate, there's a high crime rate. And one of the interesting features is that a little over a decade ago, the government of South Africa stopped keeping statistics on farm attacks per se, but rather just allowed the statistics to be released as the crime rate overall, which makes it very difficult to distinguish what's happening in the farms from the already high crime rate there. However, when you start digging down into the statistics, you see that although the murder rate and the crime rate are very high, the South African police cannot defend themselves. They're getting killed at a significantly higher rate, but at a much higher rate than the South African police are the South African farmers, especially, again, the Boer farmers, the people of European descent. And the flames of this are being fanned by statements made by political leaders, people who are pretending to political power. They've gone back to singing some old apartheid era, basically a war song, calling for the killing of the Boer farmers. And that particular song was defined as hate speech some years ago, and yet you hear that song getting sung now at rallies. There's a group called the EFF, and they seem to be loosely associated with the ruling African National Congress. Kind of the impression that I get is that these EFF people will say something kind of radical, and then the ANC, not all of the ANC, but some of the people in the ANC look to see that as a trial balloon just to see kind of how it flies and whether or not they want to go along with it or not. And, of course, there's discussion as to whether or not that impacts the attacks on the farms, on the farmers. But, of course, it creates an environment where people are going to think that these farm attacks are acceptable. And that's one of the, I think, the key issues. Another one of the key issues here is that the attacks don't seem to be just random violence. They're carefully planned. Mm-hmm. Frequently, the people seem to be highly trained and motivated. I've seen at least one report where the victims said that it appeared to be not just South Africans, but also Zimbabweans that were involved in the attack. Many of these attacks happen along the coast, or along the border with Botswana, and then near the border with Zimbabwe. So that does provide an avenue for foreigners to ingress, and it's on that side of the country where they would be most apt to be found. Overall, it presents an image of more of a paramilitary intimidation or terrorist campaign. And when you go back and take a look at how the ANC came to power, they actually had essentially a terrorist wing that announced its existence with a bombing campaign. Back in the day, they used to lay landmines out in the rural areas. The landmines were very indiscriminate, of course. They killed a lot of people. Eventually, they had to stop with their landmine campaigns. It was alienating people. But those types of terroristic violence in the countryside does have a very deep root in South African history going back over the past several decades. And then specifically the white-owned farms out in the rural areas were considered by the ANC back in the day to be legitimate military targets in their struggle for power. So honestly, a lot of what we're seeing today looks like it is a continuation of policies that we would have thought would have ended with the end of apartheid and with just general democracy and franchising all of the people in South Africa.
Mark, it's really quite curious that we haven't had more, I guess, media coverage on this. We don't know where the UN stands on this. We don't know where the African nations, the other ones, stand on this. In your travels, what are you hearing? I mean, is there some kind of investigation that may be happening, or is there some sanctions that are coming out of the State Department, or some kind of response coming out of even the European Union?
The only thing that we've heard was that this was addressed back in March by members of Parliament in Australia. And, of course, that created a big row. People were accusing them of racism and everything. And then that kind of died down. And, of course, there have been some independent journalists. Lauren Southern comes to mind. She did a very good documentary on the situation there. I thought it was a very balanced documentary. And then, of course, President Trump famously tweeted about that, and that caused quite a bit of a stir. But quite frankly, most of the mainstream media is not addressing this. There have been a couple of articles, reasonably fair articles in the mainstream media, but for the most part, it's not getting addressed. For example, if you go take a look at ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation in Australia, their whole spin on it was, what did our members of Parliament say, and it was that kind of a focus on it. They did not actually go back and look at why something was said or what the topic was that was being discussed. And so this is leaving a lot of the Boer farmers out there thinking that nobody cares, nobody notices what's going on. As a result of that, they have established essentially a social media campaign. One of the things you'll see is under the hashtag Boer Testimony, and people are videotaping their experiences and then posting that to YouTube, and then these get shared around on Twitter. But a lot of the folks are very depressed because they feel like, aside from that one tweet from President Trump, which stirred up a little bit of a political row, and then that was it, the whole thing is getting overlooked, it's getting forgotten. And so they're saying, are they having an effect? And so social media, especially Twitter, is where we're actually seeing a lot of the activity. And I kind of got interested in this. I was, of course, reasonably familiar with the situation by listening to, Brendy Richards had her show, The Truth About South Africa. That helped introduce me to what was going on.
Yeah, I know Brendy.
But then I started seeing this here in recent weeks, and I felt like I had to get involved somehow myself, start looking into what's going on. So I'm one of these people, I'm going to research it and come up with my own information, come up with my own opinion on it. And I've found some scholarly papers dealing with the matter, papers produced by non-government organizations at which government representatives were present. And so when they try to say that it's not happening, or they try to say that the rate of attacks of white farmers is not higher than it is in the general population, these statements are very untrue. And the government knows that because they have their own statistics. Even though they're not keeping statistics on farm attacks per se, they have deprioritized it. Now, the priority crimes in South Africa, and they've got, again, terrible crime rate, but the priority goes to dealing with thefts of money in transit or stuff impacting the copper trade, for example. Of course, if you go in and try to kill a rhinoceros for, parts of the rhinoceros to sell on the black market, that, of course, is a priority crime. But they've deprioritized the farm attacks. And that's very significant because they deprioritized it roughly at about the same time that they also eliminated a rural police group known as the commando system, which was actually very effective in providing police protection out in the rural areas. Because remember, these farm attacks have been going on since prior to the end of apartheid. They've been going back at least to the early 90s. And the commando system was very good at providing security in the rural areas. They had a look at this, it was about 10 or 15 years ago that they had a look at it to see if they wanted to continue with the commando system or what to do. There were some issues with the commando system, but they said that they needed to keep it, not disband it, at least until they had something else in place. Well, they went ahead and disbanded it anyway, and then they stopped keeping statistics specifically on farm attacks and just let that be part of the overall background noise of the high crime rate in South Africa. Now, those two events taken together tell me that perhaps they're complicit in this. They're deliberately making the farmers vulnerable and then deliberately trying to cover it up. That's what it looks like. I don't want to accuse anybody of anything like that, but that is what it looks like to me. It looks very suspicious. So at any rate, back to the media, the social media campaign. So folks are mentioning this. One of the things that I've gotten involved with them, one of the things that we're doing We've been tweeting out to the United Nations, the African Union, various offices in the United States State Department trying to call attention to what's going on there. In fact, it was interesting, one of the tweets, somebody responded they had no idea that the United Nations had an office that its job was to prevent genocide.
Yes.
But he discovered that when he found out that we had copied that particular address in on one of our tweets. One of the other things we're doing, we're trying to pick up some of the media that has covered this and make sure that they're aware that there are issues and they need to go back and take another look at it. We've tried copying in all of the members of the Australian Parliament who were initially involved in that discussion back in March and April, as well as the media that had covered that particular polemic, to try to get them to take another look at the underlying cause of why the topic even came up. But it's interesting, again, like there doesn't seem to be any type of a response from officialdom or from any of the media.
I would think that maybe there had been some side conversations. You know, we just had the UN General Assembly and then the UN Security Council. Surely there has been some side conversations on some actions that can be taken, because, I mean, what's going to happen is that the economy of South Africa is going to, I think it's continuing to suffer, and at some point it's just going to tank completely. I mean, they obviously have other things that they can export, but when it has its own internal consequence here, and that means feeding their own people, correct?
Well, that's a very interesting point that you bring up. Because if those attacks continue and the farmers are forced off the land, there's essentially three options that they're going to have. One is to turn that land over to other people who perhaps do not have the corporate experience in order to know how to farm it. Keep in mind, these people that are farming this land, they have settled that land generations ago.
Yes, yes.
And there's a lot of, and by the way, this whole topic that they're referred to by some of the people that are trying to stir the trouble up, they're referred to as settlers. But that's a very misleading term. Like I say, they got there centuries ago in some cases. They've been on this land for generations. Didn't take it from anybody because nobody was on it, because nobody was using it, because until they settled it themselves, until they arrived there themselves and developed it with irrigation, nobody was doing anything with it. There were some nomads. That was it. But regardless of that, it takes some experience to understand all of the different aspects of running a farm as a business. And if they turn it over to people who have not had this type of training or don't have, even if they have some training, there's going to be a learning curve as they develop the experience. But, of course, the concern is that the farms might just basically fall apart, and that could result in a famine, in addition to a refugee crisis because of the ethnic cleansing. And that's what this looks like, by the way.
Indeed.
Another option that they would have would be, perhaps there's a deal cut between the ANC and China. Now, both South Africa and China are part of BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And China's been very active in moving into Africa with investment. They offer, just a whole range of stuff, building infrastructure. They offer loans. They now have a military base established in Djibouti.
Correct.
They sold some fairly state-of-the-art surface-to-air missiles to neighboring Zimbabwe. And so one option might be for them to move in and do corporate farming. That might help, that might alleviate a famine. But, of course, what happens to all of these people who are being stirred up thinking that they're going to get free land if all of a sudden this gets, sold to some foreigners? Now, I think the government is already kind of ahead of the game on this, because they've got the narrative out that the difference between the so-called settlers and the Chinese is that they have invited the Chinese in.
Indeed.
So they're kind of ahead of the game on trying to set up an ally for that. But still, these people that are getting stirred up to do this, or at least to go along with it, are going to get betrayed. But there's a third option there, other than giving it to people who don't know how to use it, or giving it, for example, to foreign investment corporate farmers. Another option, and this is what I'm wondering if this might not be what they're looking at, would be to go after the mineral resources that was available under some of this land. If you take a look, a lot of the farm attacks seem to be concentrated north and west of Johannesburg, Pretoria area. And that happens to be an area where there is a concentration of gold mines. Gold, of course, is one of the major exports for South Africa. But when you take a look around, they're terribly rich in a lot of other minerals. I mean, they got obviously diamonds as well, but they've got cobalt. They've got just an incredible number of minerals. And that would be very important to feed China's growing industrialization.
Yes.
So I can't help but think that maybe somehow they're going to benefit from this.
Well, I would think here at some point there's probably some discussions and maybe some movement that you might be some of this network there, this farming network, might be getting some outside security protections. Hiring a DynCorp or a triple canopy kind of thing, just to kind of see what really is happening there on the ground, do some investigations. Surveillance. And then we might see here at some point even some legal charges or some bigger sanctions coming from the United States. If anything is happening, I think the United States is rather slow at any kind of a response, sadly so. But I think if we put some public pressure out there to the State Department or USAID or...
And we've been doing that. We've been trying to include all of them on the tweets, but again, it needs to get bigger. It needs to get stronger. These things should get retweeted, not half a dozen times or a dozen times. We need them to be retweeted thousands of times.
Exactly. Well, we're at a crisis level, and I think maybe only you and me, maybe a few others are calling it a crisis level at this point. Right. But that's exactly where we are.
This could very easily destabilize. Again, it's the most developed economy on the continent. It's the second largest economy on the continent. It is a major world supplier for an incredible number of minerals. And if they wind up having a refugee crisis due to de facto ethnic cleansing, that's what it is. If they wind up having a famine on top of it all, this could have implications for regional and ultimately global security. And there's some big players involved in it,
And there are very big players, and China is one of them, and I would suspect, right behind China is probably Russia, too. And
that's the other thing, because Putin has offered that all these people can move to Russia, but all that would do, if somebody really is trying to ethnically cleanse South Africa, then all that would do is help them ethnically cleanse the area. That's correct. That's not being friends of these people. And he's got the power. He could pick up the phone and call down to South Africa, and he'd only have to say a couple. If he said to cut it out, that would go a lot farther than it did when Obama said it to him about the meddling in our elections.
Indeed.
And he could shut that down real fast if he wanted to. And the government of South Africa has the power to do that. I understand that their police force is under-equipped, they're spread very thinly, and they can't even defend themselves. All right, and then going along with that, there's some corruption. But again, if this were a priority to the South African government, they could take care of it by deploying the police, by making sure they're properly equipped. They could get funding from China to do that. China would be happy, sure, to lend them some money. They could probably get funding from a lot of places, probably get it from the United States.
Well, thank you, Mark, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. And for the listeners out there, please go check out there are some articles. I'm looking at one that even CBS reported it back in October of 2017. But we need to help bring some real attention to this crisis. And it is a crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, if nothing else. And Mark, thanks so much for your contribution to this and your attention to this, and come back soon.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, more coming your way, so stay with us.
You are about to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words: teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Very happy that you could stay with us. For this next segment, I've gone all the way to Europe, and I've got the distinct honor of having Halya Coynash with us, who is with part of a team on, I guess you would say, human rights, but it's much more than that because of what is happening and been happening as a result of the tactics that Moscow has been applying. I would say, Halya, 50, 60 years or something like that, but welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
You know, we have got so many people. We've got people in journalism that have been killed. We've got those that have been kidnapped. We have got some very strange things that have even happened here in the United States. Mm-hmm. But we've got a particular fella in that I think we need to mention, and that's Yuri Dmitriev. And Yuri is actually a historian, and he's being persecuted by Moscow, and he's in detention. Can you explain a little bit of this so it will give us a sense of the kind of tactics that Russia applies?
I'll try. Yes, Yuri Dmitriev is he's a historian, and he is also somebody who's been very important for Ukraine, for Russia, and actually for a lot of people whose families suffered under Joseph Stalin in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. Because he and his organization, which is called Memorial, have been, they found a huge number of unmarked graves in a place called Karelia, which is sort of north of St. Petersburg in Russia. And, they've managed to uncover who the people were who were buried there. And I mean, most of them were, well, all of them were basically victims of the terror, the Stalin terror in 1937-38. And it is likely that is actually the reason that he was persecuted initially, because Russia under the present regime, under Vladimir Putin, who was the president, is increasingly trying to hide the crimes of the Soviet past. It's very strange. I mean, in principle, they're not Russian crimes, they are Soviet crimes, but in fact, Russia is now defending Stalin very much, who was a mass murderer. And it is increasingly going after organizations like Memorial and unfortunately like people like the historian Dmitriev, in order to they're trying to discredit both the organization and people like the historian in order, I suppose, to it's hard to even find a word for it, to kind of justify Stalin, to justify the repression, to say that really it wasn't that bad. Now, what happened in 2016 at the very end of the year and in December was that they arrested Dmitriev, or Yuri, probably Dmitriev actually. He's 61 now. It sort of feels a bit strange, calling by his first name, I guess. But they arrested him on the most bizarre charges, and very cynical charges. And when you ask about how this is similar to other cases, it's a very typical thing that is happening at the moment, that they find charges that will turn people off a person, that will make them think that there's something wrong. Yes, now the charges that they chose to lay against Dmitriev in 2016 were of, wait for it, child pornography.
Indeed.
Which it sounds absolutely shocking. The problem was that there was no child pornography. There were 119, I think, photos over a period of around about 5 years of his adopted daughter, who had been very, very weak when he adopted her from a children's home. And, she'd been extremely weak, underweight, and the people in the children's home advised her, and the social services advised him to monitor her development, to check that she was developing correctly. So this is something that actually often happened. I mean, he wasn't the only person who's ever done this. He was taking photos of the child over the next 5 years. She was naked because basically it was the only way in which they would be able to see what she looked like, whether she was physically okay. And he was writing her weight and her height, which frankly is not the sort of thing people who are, I don't know people who are into
right.
I think it's probably not what they're normally interested in, frankly. I think, you would look for sexually explicit photos, and none of these were sexually explicit at all. They were simply photos of a little girl who had problems with her health. Now, they basically used this as a kind of method with Russian propaganda television channels, which are, Russian-controlled or state-controlled television channels. They produced a couple of really horrendous pieces of propaganda in which they tried to accuse Memorial and Dmitriev of all sorts of horrendous things, and obviously they used the case of this child pornography charge, which was nonsensical, as though somehow it completely discredited him and discredited Memorial. In fact, it did neither. But of course, it depends on who's got the control of the media button. If you can distort a television program using, and try to kind of hide the facts, which were that these were photos of a young child which were only on his computer. They were in a separate file on his computer, under her name, Natasha, and really only there in case the Social Security people wanted to see and check her development. Over all of those years, there were never any problems with the Social Security people at all. I think I may be using the wrong word. Social services. They were completely happy. He was he was an optimum father of this little child who loved him very much. Anyway, this all went. They found a mathematician. This is the prosecution. They found a mathematician, an art historian, and I've forgotten the third person. Somebody else very strange, like an architect. The three people were prepared to give an supposedly expert assessment, saying that they had found pornography in 9 of the photos, 9 out of 119. Now, the defense, this went to court, the defense produced proper experts, like the head of I'm not sure if there's such a term in English, sexology? Yes, okay, well, the professor of sexology at something like Moscow University actually appeared in court and said this is complete nonsense. There's no pornography in these pictures at all. And, they produced other witnesses, experts, who said that, yes, indeed, this was absolutely standard procedure, that people would take such photos. Eventually, there was an awful lot of publicity over this case, and it all became so obviously high profile and very, very damaging that for a moment there seemed a moment of hope, because quite incredibly, the first court actually acquitted him. Yeah? And yeah, I say incredibly not because he was guilty. He was completely innocent, but it is absolutely incredible for Russian courts in political cases to behave at all independently.
So, Halya, where we are with this is we have a historian who is attempting very much to prove historical facts that the old Soviet Union has denied for years, especially when he uncovered these bodies in these graves. And the Russian has obviously a historical society that was created by Putin, I think, in around 2012. And so what Dmitriev is trying to do is say, well, there's more here that needs to go into the history. And Moscow, the Kremlin, is pushing back hard on Dmitriev, so they've concocted whatever they can to discredit his work and him, right?
That's exactly what they're trying to do, yes. And I mean, the very upsetting thing is that, there seemed to be this moment of success when suddenly he was acquitted. And then they came back with basically the same charges. They first of all revoked the acquittal at appeal level. The prosecutor appealed and revoked the acquittal, though the acquittal was completely correct. And then they rearrested him. He'd been out of custody for maybe 2 months. That's all. Since December 2016, they rearrested him, and this time they have come up with really serious charges of depraved behavior, but on exactly the same charges with the same child who has always, they had no evidence in the first place. So I think what has happened is that they have managed to influence the child's grandmother. She had a grandmother originally, it was just that the grandmother gave her to the children's home. And they are obviously working in coordination with the grandmother to try to concoct new charges, which didn't appear for 2 years. Yes? I mean, the entire period of time that they're making up these charges. I mean, I think, you can go into all sorts of details. The point about this particular case is that, a huge number of writers, philosophers, artistic people in general, even in Russia and throughout the world, there are historians who have, come to Dimitriev's defense. They're appalled by what's happening. I mean, I think it is generally accepted that this case is total fabrication from beginning to end. Unfortunately, like with so many of the cases that I deal with on a day-to-day basis with, Ukrainian cases, one of the worst things about it is that the courts do what the security service says, but it gets decided. It's not 100% certain that this is decided in Moscow. It could be decided locally. It's looking more and more likely that it's been decided in Moscow, that this is an attack on one historian of the terror, of the Soviet terror, and on Memorial, which is, a world-renowned organization, which is, for people like me, whose family was killed in 1937. An organization like that has just been, incredibly important. Finding out, it was the only way for people to actually find out where in my case, my grandfather and his brothers were killed. It was the only way of finding out was through this organization, which with huge sort of commitment and sacrifice, devoted years of their lives to kind of uncovering the details. Now, clearly, that's not what they want at the moment under the Putin regime.
Halya, in the work that you and your team are doing, are you finding common denominators such that Dmitriev is not the only case? I would think that there would be some connectivity points, that there are other Dmitrievs out there.
Yes.
And I don't know much. I'm over here in the United States, but the little snippets that we get over here, you can see a pattern, and I would think outside intelligence services, state departments or diplomatic corps, the ambassadors, they watch this kind of thing, because there could be uprisings and protests, and next thing you know, you got a U.S. embassy or some other foreign embassy in someplace in Russia that has got some protests going on. So we watch these kinds of things. Sure. There has got to be some other connective tissue to other cases, right?
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately now, because Russia is occupying Crimea, this is particularly of relevance to sort of Ukrainians, because there are so many political prisoners. One of the ways that Russia, it's, one of the common denominators that you talk about, the connections, is that in both cases, Russia is using, it's actually the FSB. It's the Federal Security Services called in full. The FSB has all sorts of methods which are very similar to the old KGB in Soviet times. One of the things that is happening increasingly in both Crimea and in Russia is that they are actually, I'm beginning to forget what I was going to say. There were two things actually. One of them, the one that I now remember, is that they fabricate cases completely in order, from the beginning, with the full knowledge that they can get away with it because the courts do not ask questions. The prosecutor, if the prosecutor is different from the prosecutor, first of all, will ask no questions. In most cases, they use torture. If people are a little bit older, in Dmitriev's case, they can't torture him physically. So, the only torture they can use is psychological pressure. Younger people tend to get tortured. Another very typical factor is I've just is basically using very cynical forms of prosecution in order to try to discredit people and to try to convince the world that somehow, for example, you've probably heard of Oleg Sentsov, who has been on hunger strike now for almost 150 days.
Oh, gosh.
And his life is seriously in danger. Now, this is a Ukrainian filmmaker from Crimea who was imprisoned on absolutely fabricated charges. So fabricated, somebody actually, the Russian human rights people called it ideologically motivated terror. They sentenced him to 20 years without any crime at all. And his life is now in danger. In his case, in Dmitriev's case, in a lot of the other cases, what is happening is that they are taking these kind of cases and trying to use them to justify, well, for example, Oleg Sentsov's case was to justify invading and annexing Crimea. It was kind of supposed to prove that Ukrainians were somehow doing bad things. In the case of Dmitriev, it's trying to again prove that that the current regime in Russia is right, that actually it wasn't that bad under Soviet times, and look how discredited these people are.
Halya, I would say you can look at the conflict that's going on in Syria, and you can see the disinformation and the displaced blame. I mean, Russia's not taking the blame for anything that has happened in Aleppo or Idlib. So they're not taking the blame for the Malaysia flight that went down. And so this is a tactic, and I would say the intelligence services certainly know what the truth is. But if you have the people like Dmitriev that are trying to say, well, let me give you some more information here that an ambassador may not have, or some diplomatic force, then they end up in detention or some kind of persecution, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I if I could just sort of say, I mean, in Crimea, this is happening absolutely brazenly. There is a wonderful organization, a sort of civic initiative called Crimean Solidarity, which began mainly among Crimean Tatars, but not only, some ethnic Ukrainians as well, began this organization after the political repression began. And, they're supporting political prisoners, but they are also providing information. Russia has crushed free press in Crimea. You don't have any anymore. And so it's been very, very important that the social media were reporting armed arrests, armed searches, horrendous things that were happening, people being tortured. These civic activists in Crimean Solidarity were providing that information. It was incredibly important. Now, since over the last year and a half, I would say that, a very large number of my Facebook friends, people whom I was contacting over what was happening in Crimea, have actually been arrested themselves. And they are facing, again, very, very long sentences on charges that bear absolutely no scrutiny at all. And the idea is clearly to kind of try to crush the information flow, try to crush those who are providing information to the West.
And so when you have journalists that show up dead, and they do.
Well, that's another thing as well. Yes.
Well, but I mean, they're necessarily trying to report some of these things. So those that are trying to report are now afraid to report because of fear of death.
Of course, yeah. No, well, I mean, very recently, a person was poisoned, probably because he was trying to get to the bottom of how 3 journalists in the Central African Republic. I mean, it all sounds as if it's all over the world, but in fact, the Russian link is very, very clear. These were probably killed, these 3 journalists, including one guy who was just wonderful, Jamal, his name was, who was very, very important for Crimea, for Ukrainians generally. Now, the 3 of them were killed almost certainly by the, it may not have been directly the security service, the Russian security service, but it was definitely Russians who were
hired hands.
Yes, yeah. And, so yes, I mean, the number of people, well, I mean, we've all seen what's happened in England as well with these, these former agents, Skripals. But the other thing the other thing that is very important to mention, and it's extremely worrying, is that, Russia is spending an inordinate amount of money on, for example, Russia Today, which you probably have in America.
We do.
Yes, well, unfortunately, and I will say it quite openly, it is, it's reasonably intelligently done propaganda, but it is propaganda. And they tell really quite toxic lies on a lot of subjects. And a lot of the other organizations which, they may not even realize that they're actually being supported by Russia, who is fueling people. They don't want to leave Crimea. They don't want to stop their aggression against Ukraine. They don't want to stop bombing children in Syria. And so they simply spend money on propaganda instead. And, it's basically, brutally speaking, it's cheaper to pay journalists without very many ethics.
We call them trolls over here.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah, that this is about trolling. Yeah, it's all worrying.
We're so happy here in the United States that we can, have some, channel to people like you that are trying to tell some of these stories, because they're not going to get told even in our own media.
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
It's like it's too much trouble. And then if you want to try and, get the details, the accuracy of the details of some of these stories in order to tell them, there isn't anybody in Moscow that's going to cooperate.
No.
So we have to deal with whatever it is that we have to deal with. And we can clearly see a pattern. I mean, the pattern goes back to certainly around the 1940s, it hasn't stopped since then. And
well, in fairness, it did stop for a while. I mean, or at least it got much better under Reagan. After in the 1990s. I mean,
right.
In terms of the banditry in the country, it was probably worse. But in terms of the sort of kind of flickerings of democracy, they were beginning in the 1990s. I think Vladimir Putin, who was ex-KGB,
correct,
an ex-KGB agent, has an awful lot to answer. Well, I mean, I hope one day he will answer at the International
Not a chance.
But I mean, well, no, I'm not so hopeful either. But it would be very nice if he did. He has an awful lot of war crimes on his record. As well as you said, Denise, murders of journalists, Anna Politkovskaya, many others, and terrible things that have happened in Crimea since Russia invaded. Well, I mean, just shocking, including many disappearances, actually.
Halya, we're very, very grateful that you've shared this time with us, and I hope that you'll come back often, because it's not a topic that we want to set aside. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and it affects locations across the globe, as we have seen. We had a dead Russian here in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., and then you have the attempted murders and poison in Britain. But ladies and gentlemen, please take a look at Yuri Dmitriev so you can understand what Halya is saying and sharing with us. And thanks so much for this time. Keep up the good work, and I'm going to keep in touch with you as much as I can, because I don't want to let it go.
Okay.
So thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so make sure that you stay with us.
The truth. The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Ziad, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Ziad, out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress, Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark, Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck, 2 rounds AGPT, gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. Our favorite law firm is back. Yippee! Pacific Legal Foundation. And I am joined by Brian Hodges. And we're going to talk about, again, we seem to, I don't know, the government just seems to not want to let up on property owners. And so Brian's going to explain a couple of things because we have some news that's happening at the Supreme Court. But welcome, Brian. And why are we talking about a frog that's not there? We're protecting a frog that's not there. Why are we doing that?
Well, that's what we're asking. Maybe I should give a little bit of background.
Yeah, please. It's your show.
Well, on Monday, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that Pacific Legal Foundation has been involved in for a while. The case is called Weyerhaeuser v. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and it concerns this mysterious dusky gopher frog. Just a little bit of background. The dusky gopher frog is an endangered frog that only is found in one pond in Mississippi. Now, you'd think, the Endangered Species Act authorizes Congress in certain circumstances, or authorizes the government in certain circumstances to declare critical area necessary to protect endangered or threatened species. So you'd think, this one pond in Mississippi, fair game. But the Fish and Wildlife Service declared a swath of land in Louisiana as critical habitat that can't even support the frog, and where the frog hasn't been seen since 1965.
Oh, 50 years?
Well, yeah, more than that. Interestingly, also, in association with this frog, until 2012, was named the Mississippi gopher frog. As part of this regulatory action, the Fish and Wildlife also changed its name so that it didn't have this, designation as living in only one state, which is where it's located. We represent a client who owns thousands of acres of private land in Louisiana that was declared critical habitat because, according to the Fish and Wildlife Service, if he's compelled to change the nature of the property, to alter it and maintain it in a condition that could potentially support this frog, and if the frog was reintroduced, then it could provide a potential habitat. A lot of potentials there.
All right. Let me start with this. Isn't Fish and Wildlife under what? The Department of Interior?
Oh boy, I am not. I believe so.
Okay. And don't we have a whole new administration with secretaries in each of these agencies that have a little more logical sense than we've had previously, such that they can rein in some of the stupidness of Fish and Wildlife?
Well, you'd hope that the change in administration could have that effect, but these rules have been in place for decades. The gopher frog was declared endangered back in 2001. These policies have been in place for decades, and there has been a substantial effort by the government, both legal and regulatory, to push these programs forward. So it really sort of transcends, these agencies sort of transcend politics. They become sort of immune to the changes in administrations and just go forward with their agency policies, which is what we're dealing with here.
All right. So we have a frog that's allegedly endangered and has not been spotted in a particular piece of property. So, isn't the cure, I would think, a waiver?
Well, the case raises two questions. One of them we thought was answered years ago when we litigated the Sackett case against the Environmental Protection Agency. If you recall, that was the case where property owners who lived a ways up from a lake in Idaho had their property declared a wetland, even though there were no wetlands on the property.
Yes.
And they said, we have a right to challenge this. It's the same issue that's raised in the Weyerhaeuser case, is when Fish and Wildlife comes in and says, hey, this property in the state next door could be perfect gopher frog habitat. If we forced you to turn it into perfect gopher frog habitat, should the owner be able to challenge that and have a court look at that decision? I think the common sense answer is of course. But it's the kind of administrative action that we need the Supreme Court to intervene in, just to allow the people to sort of to question these administrative acts.
What does Weyerhaeuser think? I mean, it's a big company, and you've got some cockamamie alleged creature that hasn't even been seen that is stopping progress. It is infringing on rights. How long has Weyerhaeuser had this property?
I should make clear, actually, PLF represents private family property owners. They have a company called Markle Interest, and they own most of this property that was declared critical habitat. Okay. Weyerhaeuser leases just a portion of it,
I see.
And they're represented by their own counsel.
Okay, fair enough.
But I can answer that question for the family. They think it's crazy. They think that they should be able to use their land for what they invested in. This is timberland. They should be able to harvest the timber, follow all of the regulations and, restore it and do sustainable timber practices, et cetera, et cetera. But if there is no endangered species present on their property, they should be able to at least go to a court and say exactly that. How can this be critical habitat if there's nothing here?
Did these landowners have the property before this whole issue with the frog even showed up? I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that the landowners would necessarily be grandfathered if this frog issue came later.
I'm not sure if even that the grandfathering matters in
this
case.
Okay.
But there's actually an even bigger issue that you touched on in your previous comment, is whether a species in one state, this one pond has the frog, whether that can be the tool that allows the federal government to regulate somebody's property in another state. And that's an issue that's underlying these bigger questions about, whether it can actually be reviewed or whether habitat requires the presence of a species, is this idea that the fact that allows the federal government to go in and regulate private property in Louisiana is the argument that this frog has some sort of interstate commerce effect.
I'm sorry. That's pretty fun.
So one of the issues that we would hope that the Supreme Court could reach is whether a frog that appears in one pond in Mississippi has any sort of interstate commerce effect. If it doesn't, then Fish and Wildlife is acting outside of its authority in regulating that property in Louisiana. I think that a ruling like that would actually go much further in protecting private property rights.
Indeed. So this is scheduled before the Supreme Court?
This was argued on Monday morning.
Oh!
It was on the first day.
Okay. And so what do we have to do? We have to wait, until February? Is that right, for the decision?
Well, the decision can come out at any time,
Mm-hmm.
in this yet in this term, but most likely it's because it's one of the first argued cases. It's most likely to come out around, the turn of the year.
And so I have to ask the sidebar question: were there giggles in the Supreme Court when they were kind of like me when they were presenting? Were you presenting this case? No,
the Weyerhaeuser attorney presented the case. Our PLF's argument will take place tomorrow in another case.
Okay.
In Weyerhaeuser, we were one of the parties to that argument. And, sadly, there were no giggles like the point that you found amusing
was the interstate
didn't tickle the sensibilities of the court.
They don't have much of a sense of humor. If it is, it's real dry and you have to go find it, don't you?
Yes. Well, yeah.
You kind of miss the Scalias. All right.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly we missed him being on the bench yesterday because he had the ability to cut through all of the garbage and get to the heart of the issue.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Brian Hodges at Pacific Legal Foundation. And Brian, I'm going to ask another kind of off-the-wall question. There are many legal cases across the United States that I would say deserve Supreme Court time. And to spend it, protecting property rights is a huge thing. But property rights at the expense of a frog that's not there to kind of put things in context is absurd on its face, is it not?
I wish that more people saw it that way because the frog is just one of many really small anti-government interests that motivate regulatory action against property. All over the country, we see property owners being deprived of their most basic rights over. At points, there are important issues, and at points, they're trivial. Here, the frog, regardless of what you feel about the frog itself is in danger, but it does not live there. The property is not frog habitat, so it becomes trivial. It becomes it becomes really sad that people's entire life investment is put in a parcel of property and then they're stopped because
of a ghost frog. A ghost.
Yeah, of a ghost frog.
This conversation's a little on the weird side, Brian, but anyway.
Well, if you want to talk about ghosts, our case on Wednesday deals with graveyards.
That's where that's next. So
it is October after all.
Yeah, how do you guys keep a straight? Well, never mind. I've talked to many lawyers over there at Pacific Legal. I can just about imagine what the conversation is in the break room. But so tell us about the graveyard, please.
Yeah, well, on Wednesday we're going to be arguing an extremely important property rights case called Nick v. Township of Scott. That case originates in rural western Pennsylvania, and there's a long history in rural Pennsylvania of backyard burials. So dating back to pre-revolutionary times, you owned a farm and you buried grandpa on a family plot. It's unremarkable. It seems a little odd sometimes. I live out on the West Coast where we don't do that, but it's very unremarkable. But what happens over time, the property sells, somebody else now owns the property. Who owns grandpa? The township of Scott up in Pennsylvania said, well, if you have any burial site on your property, we're just going to say that that's public property, and you're going to have to open up your land, let people come from the highway, cross over your land, and visit a site, even without verification, whether there's a body there. So a pile of old flagstones can result in an easement being placed on your property. You have to keep your property open 365 days a year under the threat of civil enforcement and fines of around $400 a day, each day being a separate violation. So our client, Rose Nick, owns a 90-acre farm.
And she's an old lady, right? She's an older lady.
Well, I wouldn't call her an old lady. She's older.
Older than me.
We're not talking. I don't know how old you are, but I won't ask. That's not gentlemanly. See how quick I was there. Well, anyway, she owns 90-acre parcel, and somebody said that some flagstones on her property were evidence of an old burial site, and the township issued a couple of notices of violation telling her that we've determined that those flagstones are a grave, therefore your property is no longer yours. You have to open up your property. She goes to the local court, says, help, they're taking my property, tell them to stop. And you know what the court says?
Too bad.
Sorry. Yes, get out of court. You're going to have to wait until, see, she was responding to a violation notice that said, you know, you're going to have to pay up and suffer all these penalties. So what does the township do as soon as she shows up in court with probably one of the most obvious takings claims we've ever seen? The township says, oh, well, we'll just withdraw the notice of violation. So the court says, get out of court. They withdrew their notice of violation. You're going to have to wait till they come after you again. So then they issue another notice of violation. And so Ms. Nick goes, well, I can't go to the state courts. This is a federal constitutional right. I'm going to go to the federal district court and ask them to stop this, force them to either pay for my property or walk away from it, one of the two, which is what the Constitution says. You know what the federal court says?
Too bad, so sad.
Nope. Too bad. You have to go back to state court, the same state court that just kicked her out. So this is because there was a case back in the mid-'80s called Williamson County that was out of the blue. The Supreme Court said that in order to state a claim for a federal taking, you have to exhaust your state, all state remedies, which would include filing a lawsuit in a state court, which gets it completely backwards because just compensation is the remedy for a taking. You can't prove your entitlement to just compensation. You can't get that remedy without a chance to go to court and prove that you're entitled to it, prove that the government action is taking your property. So for 35 years, property owners have been going through this process of getting kicked out of court, all sorts of procedural messes that have effectively blocked them from being able to enforce their federal constitutional rights, leaving property owners, you know, the right to property, the Fifth Amendment, protection of property is the only right in the Bill of Rights that's not directly enforceable in the federal courts. So that's where we stand today.
She's in no man's land, isn't she?
Yeah, we're now, you know, several years in and she hasn't gotten past go.
And so has anybody paid to have some ground penetrating radar to see if there's even a cemetery or a bones there?
No, and that doesn't even matter really, because even the principle here is even if there are bones there, it's still her property and they would have to pay to condemn an easement.
Mm-hmm. I see.
So that's sort of, I mean, it's an interesting fact, but it's irrelevant to the legal claim.
So this goes to this is argued before the Supreme Court bench tomorrow, correct?
Yes, tomorrow morning we'll be arguing the case. And interestingly enough, we have a strange ally. I guess our argument attracted the Solicitor General of the United States. So the United States had filed a brief in support of our position, which is interesting. Somebody who's often a defendant in these types of cases saw the injustice that rule
really
had. And yeah, that's sort of a surprising one, especially when we were talking before about how agencies tend to follow their own agenda regardless of the administration. Well, here we have one of the top agencies that's directly answerable to different administrations stepping in and saying, yes, property owners should have a right to directly enforce their federal constitutional rights in the federal courts. After all, that is what Congress said when it enacted the 14th Amendment, was that the Bill of Rights is directly enforceable against the states, and when it enacted the Civil Rights Act, which said that we're going to open up the federal courts to ensure that states do not violate people's civil rights.
So,
which property right is one of them.
And so at least she's not in no man's land anymore. With you, and then if you've got the U.S. Solicitor General, this has been going on a lot of years, hasn't it, Brian?
Yeah, about 35 years.
Oh, God, I didn't realize it was 35.
I'm sorry, not this case. I was talking about not Rose Nick's case. No, Rose Nick's case has been going on for about 5 years.
Okay.
The law that we're challenging has been in place for about 35.
Okay, fair enough. When you go into Supreme Court, how much time do you get? 30 minutes?
The total argument's an hour, so each side typically gets 30 minutes to argue. We have given up some of our time to the United States because they want 10 minutes to argue in support of the position that she should be given access to the federal courts.
And I would say, since the Supreme Court is not televised, this would be one case that I would vote yes to televise this particular argument, wouldn't you?
I would love to see all arguments televised because I think it's a lesson. It's hard to understand what the justices mean just by reading the transcript.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would help people to understand how the court functions and how it deliberates, especially at this time when issues surrounding the Supreme Court have such political interest.
Boy, indeed it does. The Supreme Court can't get out of the headlines here for the last month or so or more, and I suspect it'll be in the headlines for several more months to come. Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Brian Hodges of the Pacific Legal Foundation, and you can visit their website and see the work that they do, pro bono, I might add, to their clients at pacificlegal.org. Remarkable cases, and you guys, I always say this, you really are, unsung heroes in the work that you do. So congratulations, and I'll be looking for the email in a big way to see what the results are. And Brian, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
About to join Don Newen, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio, and Denise Simon, host of the Denise Simon Experience, for a weekly situation report, or SITREP. 18 hours a day, Denise Simon lives her life as an intel analyst. 18 hours a day, Don Newen lives his life in the world of rock and roll. 1 hour each day, Newen receives a daily SITREP from Simon. Welcome to the Drive Time Situation Report. Fasten your seatbelt. You're now in Don Newen's car, and he is calling in for his SITREP.
Check the Talk America Radio schedules for showtimes at talkamericaradio.us.
Let me talk to you, black people. When you vote for blacks and put them in office under the banner of the Democrat Party, please explain to me what black people get as a result. This was not a nap that we have been taking. We are in a coma. You know what the interesting thing about pensions is? That's today's money given to people who ain't doing nothing for you today. Get off that black Democrat tit that they've been sucking on. Your country is being stolen from you, and the promise is being stolen from your children, and they're telling you it's all right while the rest of the world is trying to lap us. Well, why are we doing so poorly? 2 words. teachers' unions. Are you kidding me?
Black Man Thinking, Monday nights, 9 p.m.
Hi, this is Donna Fiducia, co-host of Cowboy Logic Radio. For 28 years, I was in the mainstream media, most recently as an anchor at the Fox News Channel. No more. Ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. Radio networks like Talk America Radio will not fail you. Radio shows like Cowboy Logic Radio will not fail you. Check out the entire roster of over 60 weekly radio shows by visiting talkamericaradio.us. That's talkamericaradio.us.
TalkAmericaRadio.us.
And thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I gotta tell you, I have really an overachiever on the other end of this call. I'm almost like super humbled that he has decided to join us. But who I have is Daniel Toma. And Danny has served, oh my gosh, 25 years as a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. State Department. That in itself deserves a reward. And he's been assigned postings really from the sublime to the ridiculous, all the way from mostly, I guess, in Europe, but you've also done some tours in Latin America. And Danny is here to tell us about a book that he's so proud to have coming into the bookstores, and that is America First, Understanding the Trump Doctrine. And so with that, Danny, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
You know, I've been meaning to, and I'm so happy that you're here because it's real important for us to get a perspective of the baton that those in the State Department are assigned to carry and have been assigned to carry, I would say, for the last, several decades, to, our counterparts wherever they are worldwide. Mm-hmm. And the State Department seems to be a puzzle to us. We think we understand whatever doctrine that they should be selling out there to allies and partners and adversaries and so forth and so on. But Danny, I gotta say, it's been so conflicted in the last, I don't know, certainly 10 years, right?
Well, a couple things. For one, the State Department itself, doesn't, or at least shouldn't, make policy. And I'll have to, let me put an aside here. I retired from the State Department 4 years ago, so of course the views I'm giving are mine and not those of the State Department or anybody else. But so since the State Department, under the leadership of the Secretary of State, is the President's foreign policy arm, mm-hmm. then they're going to carry out the policies, or should carry out the policies of whatever president is setting those. And where some of the confusion, I think, that you're talking about has come from is because I think that our policies in the past, at least in the past couple of decades, have been somewhat confused. We've not really had a clear end game. What were we hoping to accomplish with some of these policies? I think that's dramatically changed with President Trump coming into office. And you can sum it up in two words, which is also the title of my book, America First. In other words, we're going to have a foreign policy that puts the interests of Americans first. In other words, the safety, security, and well-being of our people. And you saw that in quite dramatic fashion, even just today, with the announcement of the United States-Canada-Mexico agreement, President Trump came in. He criticized NAFTA as a candidate. He criticized NAFTA coming into the White House. He said, we need to scrap it. It's a bad deal. We need to get something better. All the experts, laughed at him, said you can't do it. Well, guess what's happened? 18 months later, he's put together a really good deal for all three countries, but particularly for the United States.
Well said. But in your book, I would say that you are explaining a realistic assessment of where the Trump administration is attempting to enforce a doctrine that puts America back really as in its leadership and not as just a coalition of a bunch of countries that are trying to, keep some kind of equilibrium. I mean, keeping equilibrium is one thing, but creating our own luck and our own opportunity for the United States first is something that just hasn't happened.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in a while. And like I said, we've kind of forgotten why we were doing this. Another good example, September 11th, 2001, we were brutally attacked by people working for Al-Qaeda. We did the one response we could have, which was to neutralize that threat by going into Afghanistan, whose Taliban government harbored them, to take out Al-Qaeda and to take out that government so that we wouldn't have a threat to our people again. We were very successful at first, but then we got distracted by other things. Right. Things like nation building and democracy promotion and everything else without any kind of end game, without realizing what exactly were we hoping to accomplish in the long term, without measurable goals. And that's why we're still over there, because we can't decide when the time is when we can declare victory and bring our people home. We got distracted with another war in Iraq that wasn't germane to our interest over there. So there were we've been floundering a bit, and what we get with this president is really a return to the kind of principles, America first, that our country was based upon. I mean, this is the kind of foreign policy that our founding fathers envisioned. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives out there who talk about original intent, when it comes to the Constitution, when it comes to governance, when it comes to separation of power. What did the founding fathers intend? But when you come back to them and say, well, what did the founding fathers intend for foreign policy? They say, oh, well, we live in a different world than back then. Well, I fail to see how a policy based on putting your country first is out of date or archaic, and I think Donald Trump feels the same way. This is the kind of policy that took us from a disjointed group of newly independent colonies into becoming the greatest nation on the face of the earth, both economically and militarily. We're getting back to that. In my book, I go into a lot about the development of that doctrine of America First all through our history, all the way into the 20th century, and how President Trump is trying to get us back to that.
What I find particularly interesting, Danny, is that when President Trump has visited foreign countries for whatever summits or these big confabs that we have, whether it be in Saudi Arabia or in China, wherever they may be, he does say, look at our success so far because we are putting America first. We're not going to give up our sovereignty, which is clearly what the founding fathers were certainly fighting for.
Exactly.
But he's also proving the case that every other Western allied country should be looking introspectively too, because they can be matching a lot of our successes. Did I overstate that?
Not at all. And I think it's kind of common sense. It's human nature that we know best how to run our own households, and we would kind of resent if our neighbors came over and said, listen, you really need to cut back on your the amount of potatoes you're serving in the evening. No, we can make those decisions on our own, and even if the neighbor's right, we might resent him for telling us that. So what Donald Trump is saying with his America First foreign policy is we look out for America first because we are Americans, just like you Canadians look out for Canada first because you're Canadians, or you Chinese look out for China first because you're China. But what that means is not a policy of turning in on ourselves as much as realizing what our interests are, putting those interests on the table, stating them clearly, and then working with other countries so we can better benefit. Donald Trump brings to the presidency a unique quality in that he's not a career politician. He's a business guy, and a successful one at that. So when you're in business, you're answering to your board of directors. You're in there to make money. You're in there to turn a profit, and they're going to hold you accountable for that. He's sort of taking this approach to foreign policy as well, saying, here's what we're hoping to accomplish. Now let's sit down at the table with these other parties and see if we can meet some sort of mutual agreement. Again, getting back to this trade deal, I mentioned this again because it's today that it was announced. Donald Trump came forward, reached a deal with Mexico, and there was all sorts of wailing and gnashing of teeth coming out of Canada, and also from a lot of critics of within our own country of Donald Trump saying, we're alienating our closest allies in Canada. Well, what happened? Donald Trump was looking out for America first. He was looking out for American interests. The Canadians realized he was serious about defending those interests. This was no charade, and they came and sat down on the table and hammered out a deal that's really going to be good for not just American manufacturing, but American farmers and ranchers as well in the long term.
And they were a little embarrassed because, if I got this right, Canada made a call to our trade team, our trade representative team at 10 o'clock at night and said, okay.
Yeah, they had a midnight deadline, and they said, I guess he's not going to back down, so we better go with it or we're going to get left out in the cold.
All right. Now, I get to ask you as a challenge, if the United States is not taking the lead across the globe as best they can to maintain some kind of equilibrium, who's going to do it?
Well, but what exactly does that mean? What I mean
that's exactly right.
Yeah, is what we have to defend our interests, and we defend those interests everywhere they exist. And I go through my book. You might ask some of your listeners out there, say, well, what are our interests in these parts of the world? Well, I've got a good answer for you. Pick up my book. I've divided the entire world up region by region and talked about what U.S. vital interests are in each of those regions and what we need to do to defend them. Equally as important, we need to stay out of those matters that are not in our interest. Because if we go projecting our power just because we are, as Democratic Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said, the indispensable nation that sees further into the future, we're just going to create a lot of resentment, a lot of ill will, and work against our interests by creating instability where we don't need to be. Good example, the whole so-called Arab Spring, when there were revolts during the Obama administration against some of the established authoritarian regimes in the Arab region, which were certainly no friends of ours, and certainly not happy-go-lucky democratic places. But what happened by our backing these movements, at least by word, we have places that are now nests of instability, yes, where terrorists can take refuge and pose a direct effect to our interests where we may not have had that kind of threat before.
So let me ask you this wild question, Mr. Danny, and that is, because I noticed something during the Obama administration, and that was Obama himself didn't seem to have any friendship beyond, I guess, the token phone call once a month with some other world leaders, such that he would bring them in personally and the wives, and they'd play golf together. I think we had maybe it was Prime Minister of Britain at the time, that they went to a basketball game during the March Madness in Dayton, Ohio. But beyond that, I haven't seen that. And yet when you look at previous presidents, they all seem to have at least some kind of a deeper, or something more than a superficial relationship with some of these world leaders. And I would say that those connections have value in the diplomatic world and in a doctrine, right?
Yeah, I attest to whether Obama did or didn't have those kind of relationships, or what the depth of those relationships were. But those relationships are important. And one of the things that President Trump has been criticized for by the media is in trying to establish relationships with people like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, basically saying these people are beyond the pale. You don't even need to sit down and talk with them. But as a former diplomat myself, I understand that you got to start by talking with people, no matter how good or how bad they are. If you don't talk to them, you're not going to make any progress on anything. And he understands that. The president, does not have a huge foreign policy background, but he's got a lot of good instincts. And I think he does his best when he sticks with those instincts in terms of foreign policy and reaching deals.
You make a great point there, but I would also say, even if a president didn't necessarily have some of that, then those that are at the Pentagon, at the Joint Chiefs of Staff level, even at the 3 or 4 star flag officer level, and those in the State Department, even in CIA, there were those relationships that understood and understand, I think today, certainly with Pompeo, where we need to be going. So I see that those candles being lit and those flames, I think, growing a little bit bigger in the right way. Did I say that right?
You're right, and you bring up something very important, because a lot of times when people think about foreign affairs, we just tend to think about the military, but it's a lot broader than that. And in fact, while our military is, you might say, the most essential because they defend us from existential threats, they're also an instrument of last resort. War should always be an option in your foreign policy arsenal, but it should always be the last one, because once you go to war, then you have but one goal, and that is to win victory, or that should be the way it is anyway. So you need to exhaust all possibilities before you exercise, and hopefully don't have to exercise that option. And the way you do that is by not only just having a strong military, but having a diplomatic corps and an intelligence gathering service that is second to none, as well as trade negotiators and everything else. I think the heroes of the day today are the people from the Office of U.S. Trade Representative.
I was just going to say that.
So this approach to foreign affairs is multifaceted, with a lot of different people, and we need to make sure that we keep the best talent in there to carry forth the president's program.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Danny Toma, who has a brand new book, which you can find on Amazon.com, titled America First, Understanding the Trump Doctrine. So with that, what is the involvement of the Trump administration with the United Nations? Because I see some very good things, and I was not a first proponent or supporter of Nikki Haley being the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I thought it was going to be way out of her realm, but I was wrong, and I was pleasantly surprised. And I see that we're kind of snapping people into in the line at the UN. Is that right?
Yeah, I kind of come from the same sort of background that you do. When Nikki Haley was governor of South Carolina, there were some policy decisions that she made that I was not necessarily a big fan of, but I think she's done a really bang-up job at the United Nations. She's quite strong. She's quite forceful, and the most important thing, she is the president's messenger at the United Nations, as ambassador there, and she's getting the message across that we're going to look out for our interests, and our interests primarily. That does not mean we're going to take our toys and go home. It doesn't mean we're not going to play nicely with the others, but it means the name of the game is we're going to look out for our interests, and in doing so, we will work with other countries so we can find mutual accords that benefit both of our points of view.
Is Nikki Haley getting her instruction from this White House, or is she getting it from the State Department?
Well, the State Department is part of the executive branch, so this comes under the president. But the ambassador, any ambassador is the president's representative in the country, or in this case, the United Nations, to which that person is assigned. So, and especially with a high-level ambassadorship such as the United Nations, I am sure she's in direct contact with the Oval Office on a regular basis.
The National Security Council, I'm sure that, you know, in your travels, in your work, and in the text of your book, America First, that there could be from time to time some conflict between the diplomatic side, meaning the State Department, and the National Security Council when it comes to dealing with 200 countries, right?
Well, you know, everybody's coming at it with a sort of a different perspective and a different area of concern. So naturally, there's going to be some different views depending on what the issue is or depending on what the country is. But I think that's healthy. I mean, that's the way you know, when you have a sort of diversity of opinion there, you get better policy that way. And
so we got out of the what was it, the TPP, and the climate agreement.
Right.
That was a good thing, wasn't it?
Well, here's a funny thing. One of the things I mentioned in my book is America First is that just after the election, USA Today, which is hardly a Trump organ, came out and made a list of 10 foreign policy initiatives that candidate Donald Trump said he was going to make, the centerpieces of his foreign policy. In every single one of those cases, President Trump has either accomplished what he said he would do or has made significant progress on them. One of the things was, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. The thing about this is we're so used as Americans to having a president make promises and then forget them the minute the hand goes on the Bible as the swearing in. President Trump actually is taking his campaign promises and using them as the basis of his policy decisions, which is quite refreshing, I think, and especially in the area of foreign policy. I mean, if you want to see what President Trump is looking to accomplish, look at what he promised during the campaign. A good example of this, ISIS. On the campaign trail, President Trump said, during my administration, we're going to defeat ISIS, and everybody laughed. Everyone said, yeah, that's not going to happen. What happened? In the first year of President Trump's administration, ISIS lost 96% of its territory, over 20,000 square miles. They went from being the Islamic State to just another group of terrorist losers who are on the defensive and on the run. Mm-hmm. That was right there in his program.
He is very good at repeating his successes because the media is not going to give him that credit. And I believe, in your book, America First, you are confirming his successes. And there's still certainly more to come. And the matter of trade agreements, the matter of oil, the matter of climate and all those other kinds of nonsense, it's certainly not totally complete, but there's still work to do. But there's still a lot of work to do, but there's a lot that's been done, and even the president's critics will admit this when pressed. I mean, a good example, if you take that supposed that anonymous op-ed that was recently written to the New York Times, is supposedly written by a member of the quote resistance unquote inside the White House or inside the administration. I mean, assuming this person is a real person and not just a figment of the imagination of a New York Times writer, even this person admitted in the editorial, Trump's policies are making America more secure and more prosperous. So he doesn't like it. But if you go back and look at the editorial, it's right there. That's almost a direct quote, that Trump's policies are making Americans more secure and more prosperous. And, look at the economy. What's happened to the economy since Trump's come into office? It's doing really well. Unemployment, particularly minority unemployment, is at historic lows. Manufacturing's up. You remember back during the Obama administration and even back in the administration of George W. Bush when they were talking about, we needed to get over the fact that, get over the idea that Americans could have good manufacturing jobs like their parents and grandparents used to have. Trump never bought into that. Mm-hmm. He never drank that Kool-Aid. Mm-hmm. He said, no, America can be a manufacturing nation again with jobs, working class, blue-collar jobs
that people could raise families on. That's crucial because, we can't condemn a whole class of people just because they don't have advanced degrees to being greeters at the Walmart. No, we should keep good manufacturing jobs here. Trump understands that, and the kind of trade deals he's working out is bringing manufacturing back. Steel industry, aluminum industry, working in the coal industry, all those kind of things. And the manufacturing activity has gone up, consumer confidence has gone up, small business optimism is at highs that we haven't seen since the Reagan administration. So here's what we're talking about again. When we talk about foreign policy or any other kind of policy, you need measurements for success. You need to have end game, you need to have goals, you need to have ways of measuring it. And by any measurement that we've seen so far, it seems to be working.
Well, and there was going into the summit with Kim Jong-un, prior to the summit even happening, the media did say, is this guy ready for the Nobel Prize, Peace Prize? Because, the left and the media were stunned that this was even pulled off. And yet another one is on its way. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've been speaking with Danny Toma, who obviously and thank you for your service in the foreign service realm, who has spent 25 years in it, in a lot of posts around the world, speaks several languages, and just decided that, he had something to say, and he wrote this book, found on Amazon.com, America First, Understanding the Trump Doctrine. Not all foreign policy, but certainly concentrates on foreign policy. And you lay out a very good argument here, Mr. Danny. And I would tend to agree with you because some heads have snapped back that there's kind of like a new sheriff in town. And
that's right. And one thing I do want to tell your listeners, for those of you all who have not read a lot of foreign policy books and are afraid that this might be over your head, this book is not written for foreign policy professionals. This book is not an academic book. I think it was a fun book to write. I think it's a fun book to read. People have told me that they enjoyed it, and there are a few places where you should anyway laugh out loud. So at least I hope so.
Oh, good, because we like to certainly do that. I congratulate you on this, and I'm so pleased, one, that you took the time to write the book. I think you're doing us a public service by having this book. But I would also say thank you very much for your time here on the Denise Simon Experience, and congratulations.
Well, thank you again for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience, and we'll see you again very soon.